Hi, I'm Dr. George Curry, and welcome to another edition of Today's Health, the show that brings you the latest information on health and well-being that can impact your life today. We are so glad you could join us today. Millions of people around the country and around the world suffer from a condition known as fibromyalgia. And today we're thrilled to welcome our special guest, Valerie Lumley, who's the author of this book, exciting book, Curing Chronic Fibromyalgia. And we want to welcome our special guest, Valerie Lumley. Welcome to our show.
Thanks, George. It's wonderful to be here.
Let's talk about fibromyalgia. If someone out there in the viewing audience has been diagnosed with this, they know what it's all about.
Yeah.
But for those who maybe is new to the term, can you describe a little bit about the condition and how it affects the body?
Oh, sure. Well, it basically is a disorder of the central nervous system. And the central nervous system, as you know, is the major factor in running the body and all its biological systems. And so when it's going haywire, everything else goes haywire. And so you end up with chronic pain, body-wide chronic pain. You end up with energy deficit, which is actually you become more like bankrupt with energy. Your body's not producing enough to keep up with the demands of the energy that's being burned with fibromyalgia. The problem with the central nervous system in fibromyalgia is that it becomes exacerbated into a state of being hyperactivated and hypersensitized at the same time. So that creates anxiety, and you have this driving force of anxiety, and at the same time this terrible fight or flight syndrome all going at the same time. And it's a very hellish kind of purgatory psychologically and physically to live in. And the body-wide pain reduces your ADLs, your activities of daily living, drastically to where you can't even do dishes anymore. And it can...
So this condition is not just an inconvenience or an annoyance. It is devastating to the life and to the lifestyle.
That's right.
And it has crippling effects. And if you could share your own personal story and how it actually affected your life.
Well, sure. When fibromyalgia became triggered in me, which commonly is triggered with a minor accident, which compounds over a lifetime. It became triggered in me in 1993 when I was doing some exercises to strengthen my diaphragm because I was a classically trained singer. I was very active in local lead roles of the theater and the opera company, and ironically, something that I was trying to do to strengthen me ended up injuring my neck. I was doing crunches on the floor, and unfortunately, I had my hands up behind my neck, and I was pulling my head, which is a big taboo with doing any kind of crunches, and I popped my atlas out far enough to trigger fibromyalgia. And it just went on from there. It took 3 years to gradually get to a point where I was completely and utterly disabled. It just continued to get worse and worse.
Now you can look back and you know, and you've been able to figure out the precipitating cause, but at the time you didn't know perhaps the relationship. You just know that you were negatively affected. And what type of body symptoms were you exhibiting at the time?
Okay, well, as soon as it happened, I felt this little pop in my neck and a very sharp pain shoot down the right side of my body, and I knew something was very wrong. And so I was very careful, how I got up, and I stopped the exercises. And basically, it just started with tightening the muscles on the right side of my body, and they became tight all the time. They never relaxed. And I went to a doctor's on duty, and he gave me the typical drugs that you're given, the painkiller, the anti-inflammatory, and the muscle relaxer, and then gave me a prescription for physical therapy, which I did for 6 weeks. And it didn't really clear up what was going on. It continued to worsen, so I knew I was really in trouble. Something major was happening.
Talk about the spiraling decline of your health and what it was like at its worst.
Yeah, the downward spiral of fibromyalgia is excruciating. The pain continues to get worse, and the receptor field enlargement, which is really basically the area of the injury, the pain there just continues to get larger and larger to encompass the whole body. And I felt like I had ground glass between all of my muscles. And when I would move, it would be like the ground glass was just gnawing at my muscles. And if I exerted a muscle in any way. It got so tight it would burn because it wouldn't go back to relaxing after I stopped exerting it. So I just had to continue to do less and less and less, and my ADLs continued to decline to a point where about in 3 years I was absolutely bedridden and I couldn't move, and I was bedridden for 2 years.
You couldn't even get out of bed.
I couldn't even get out of bed. I was depressed, and I felt suicidal. And fortunately, all my meds were in a part of the house I couldn't get to, so I never did it. I never committed suicide, but that's something that's very common with the fibromyalgic, or thoughts of suicide, thinking you just can't possibly live in this much pain 24/7. And I used to think, why am I not passing out? This is so much pain. How come I'm still awake?
Right. So it started off, of course, with the joint affected, the joints being affected, the muscle being affected,
Right.
Your energy levels being affected,
Right.
your sleep being affected. So
Yeah.
eventually you couldn't.
I couldn't sleep at all. The muscles in my back got so chronically tight, they were pulling my ribs out. And I couldn't find a position to sleep in at all, and I would doze off for periods of time, but the chronic sleep deprivation makes you feel crazy after a while, and you don't even feel like you're really living your life. It's like this
Right.
nightmare you can't wake up from.
We'll talk about depression. I mean, who wouldn't be depressed to be suffering to that degree? And then in addition to that, low energy levels, and in addition to that, just not being able to do anything in your life, enjoy your
Yeah,
life.
anybody.
It sort of affected your work. It affected your relationships. It was affecting everything in your life. And you were at that time, trying to find solutions or get help. And so, what exactly were you doing? What kind of medicine were you taking? What were some of the medical experts telling you at the time?
Well, I went through about 15 doctors, and because I was a trained soprano, I wore this little button that said, "Never argue with a soprano," to my doctors, and I had a long list when I went in, and they go, "Oh dear, here comes another one," And they would tell me the gloom and doom of what you get told, that there's fibromyalgia is a degenerative disease with no known cause or cure within the medical profession, and the only way that I could feel better or manage my symptoms was to take a large battery of heavy drugs for the rest of my life, including antidepressants and all the other ones that I mentioned. And those drugs have their side effects, and then you take drugs for those side effects, and your whole system shuts down. I got to a point where I couldn't eat. I got peptic ulcer disease, and I was so constipated that nothing was working. I couldn't even urinate properly, and nothing was working anymore. And I got so weak I could hardly talk. And the thing about the doctors is they'd love to say, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? And I'd say 50. You haven't a scale for this much pain.
Right.
But the problem is when your brain is receiving all these pain signals, hundreds and hundreds of pain signals 24/7, you have trouble concentrating, and that's where the fibro fog comes from, in addition to the fatigue. It's a combination of the pain signals being received and the fatigue and the nausea.
Fibro fog, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I just, I couldn't form sentences to speak most of the time.
Right. What did your family and what and your friends and what did they? And you were singing. And which group were you singing with now?
Monterey Opera Company in Monterey,
California.
California, and the Wharf Theater in Monterey, California. I was doing lead roles with them.
So people who in your family who knew you as a
Yeah.
vibrant, soprano, a singer, an entertainer, a performer.
And I was an athlete too.
An athlete.
Yeah.
To suddenly be reduced to someone who's bedridden and can't even get out of bed.
Yeah.
How did that? What did your family and your friends?
Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to say, and of course, you don't get a lot of understanding, unfortunately, from the current medical profession, except for what I was talking about earlier, as far as hope or explanation of what's going on with you. It took me 15 doctors approximately before I found one to give me a partially correct diagnosis. And it was more of a diagnosis that described a symptom rather than the cause.
Right.
And family members and friends, they'd come over and they'd see me laying in bed, and they'd see how upset and depressed. And one friend tried to make me dinner, and I couldn't eat it, and I couldn't even get out of bed to sit in the chair to eat it. And she was asking me, well, do you want butter on your rice or this? I couldn't answer any of the questions. And finally, they're starting to get an idea how ill I was. And I saw them less and less. People don't come around when there's really nothing they can do for you, and it's just an awful situation. And I did see my mother occasionally, of course, because she lived in a nearby town. But nobody else in my family would call me and see how I was, or check on me, or come and see me, and very rarely. So people get frightened by it, I think,
Oh,
and they don't know what to do.
No doubt. Frightened, frustrated,
Frustrated, yeah.
depressed. We're here with our special guest, Valerie Lumley. The book is Curing Chronic Fibromyalgia, Choosing What Works. There is a happy end to this story, not just for Valerie, but for the millions of people who are suffering from this. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about her breakthrough in fibromyalgia. We'll be right back.
Unfortunately, I never met my grandfather, but he was the first chiropractor in our family and was a chiropractor for about 38 years. My dad and his two brothers